Hey everybody, welcome back to Talking Soccer. I am your host, Justin Horniker, and we're going to talk a little bit of St. Louis City Stadium news today. Now, typically I talk NWSL on this show, but as we get closer to the next MLS season with STL City coming in, and of course I'll always talk the men's game, but specifically St. Louis City, because I'm from St. Louis. I'm here right now. I'm rocking the SLU swag. I got the city shirt up right here at my parents' house. This is probably the most St. Louis story you're ever going to read about if you're familiar with like inter-St. Louis politics in any reason. I'm the son of a St. Louis firefighter, so I've had my fair share of it. But St. Louis City were hoping to host first they were hoping to host the last home game of the season against Sporting KC2, Sporting Lawrence, which happened this past weekend. And then if that didn't work out, they're hoping to host this playoff game this weekend against North Texas FC, which I will be at in Edwardsville, and hopefully bring some footage to the show, to the channel. But there were some electrical issues. The city were doing routine maintenance on a separate street project they have kind of next to the stadium, and it ended up with some flooding into the city's power plant. So STL City have their own power grid and their own power plant that supplies power to the stadium and to their own practice facilities, all located in downtown St. Louis. I'll throw that picture up here because it's really cool. You don't see that many downtown stadiums, downtown soccer-specific stadiums in this country at this time. So for St. Louis to be able to have that, especially with all their stadiums kind of in the same place in downtown, say what you want about downtown St. Louis, it's freaking exciting and a beautiful stadium, a beautiful environment, but they had flooding on their power plant. So no game this weekend, no game last weekend, and they're being a little bit cagey on if they're going to be able to say St. Louis City will win. They're going to host the Western Conference Final, and then depending on what happens on the East, potentially host the final as well, though it's not quite as likely at that point. And expecting them to win is maybe putting the cart before the horse a little bit with kind of the lineup that they're going to be working with, and we'll get into that a bit. But it's so funny that neither the city nor the team wanted to take real blame for who was at fault here. The city say that St. Louis City SC didn't mark things properly. The city of St. Louis, which it's going to be a little bit confusing. I have an article posted down below if you want to read a little bit more about the situation. But the city of St. Louis say that things weren't marked properly, so when they were doing this trench operation for the street, they ended up ruining one of the conduits to the power plant. Look, I'm not an electrician. I don't necessarily understand exactly what happened, but it's a fixable issue, something that just comes at the worst possible timing for St. Louis City SC. You hope that they'll be able to finally host a game at the stadium ahead of 2023, the inaugural season. But that being said, it gives us a good opportunity to really kind of take our first dive into this team, talk a bit about what's happened at MLS Next Pro this season, and just how the DPs and MLS players that City do have signed have looked so far this season. So if you're unfamiliar, MLS Next Pro is MLS's specific Division 3 system that, if you were unaware in the past, MLS had their two teams either in the USL or playing in other leagues. Now, for the most part, they're going to be playing MLS Next Pro alongside with Rochester and some other independent teams. But it gives academy players who are too good for the academy system, but not quite at the MLS level, an opportunity to play against professional players. And it gives players that were kind of in that USL system another opportunity to get a better look with a team. And it gives teams more opportunity to control the players on their roster and a little bit of wiggle room around MLS roster rules as they work players back into rehabbing. We actually saw it when City played Vancouver. They were playing Lucas Cavallini, was getting some rehab starts before he was able to come back to full action with Vancouver Whitecaps. So it gives teams more of an option to play players. Like if you're familiar with the Premier League, they have, the U23 league, which is the same thing, right? It's that similar concept. We talked about this a little bit with NWSL in the past on this channel about how they need kind of another option for these players that are on the fringes, who don't get a lot of playing time NWSL wise, but are just itching for game time and would be players in most other leagues in the world. So that's what MLS Next Pro is. They have their playoff system. It's 4 teams in each conference, semifinal, and then a final, and the higher seeded team hosts each game. So that's what St. Louis City SC2 is currently in. And they have a really interesting team because they have this ability to play some of their designated players that they already have in the country, to play some of their already contracted players in some games. So gives them an opportunity to get familiar with the St. Louis City system and familiarize themselves with some of their players, some of their coaching staff that they'll be interacting with next year with the first team. And it's really quite funny when you have designated players like João Klaus, who has scored 4 goals in 200 minutes, and it's just so much better than this league, and they actually haven't even played him that much because of that. Because it's this interesting philosophy, right? You have a team that doesn't have a first team. You have players who are going to play for that first team but still need to get playing time in, as well as this being a developmental league. And John Hackworth, who is the coach for the 2 team and the coach for, he's their coaching director. So even though Bradley Cardinal is the first team coach, John Hackworth is the director of coaching. So in charge of this like general philosophy from the 2 team all the way down through the academy. So when you have players like João Klaus needing some playing time to not just get fit, but also just to have a little fun, show the fans like what this player is. You also have City 2 potential first teamers, goalkeeper Roman Berkey, who has played some games. He doesn't regularly start, but when he first came over, he started some games. Midfielder Thomas Ostrak was bought for $825,000. Left back and sometimes midfielder Selmir Pedro. He was a Sarajevo player, a young player on the Bosnian national team, and someone who was relatively cheap that I think is going to work out really well for St. Louis City. You have midfielder Edouard Lewin, who they brought over for $1.1 million. Isaac Jensen, who's a left winger. Joachim Nilsson, who was a free transfer from Arminia Bielefeld, but is very good. As well as players who were USL players in the past, but play for STL2 and have actually been giving contracts, in Josh Yarrow and Kyle Hybrid. So you have these players who are going to have some impact on the first team. You also have some academy players like Aaron Hurd, like Fritz Vollmer, like Anthony Foppel, who have been getting the reps in. Aaron Hurd played for the US U20s today, and there's a lot of talent there, and there's a lot of talent throughout the league. And when you're talking about who they're going to be facing, which is North Texas FC, which is FC Dallas's 2 team, there's a lot of talent there as well. If you know anything about Dallas's system, they have a lot of good young players, even if they don't necessarily translate that to the pro level as much. But it's not going to be an easy game. St. Louis City lost 3-1 to North Texas FC when they played them 10 days ago. And that game didn't play a lot of their top players, but players got a chance. And ultimately, you have to win the games. And North Texas FC came out with a lot of energy. They scored 2 goals in the first 20 minutes, and St. Louis just couldn't respond. But there's this dichotomy here, because you have games like that, and then you also have games like they played San Jose Earthquakes 2, and they won 6-1, where they went down to 10 men at halftime and were still able to score 3 goals. So, where is the talent level? What team do they want to put on the pitch for the playoffs? Are they aiming to go with a more developmental focused team, or are they wanting to put the best team possible? And there are reasons to do both, especially it'll be fun to win the playoffs. It'll be fun to have a title. It'll be fun to have that story. But ultimately, if you're trying to develop players, you probably want to play the players who could use a start at a big time stage. Your younger players, your players from other systems who maybe haven't gotten this chance before. That would be the time to kind of use this 2 team to your advantage. But like I said, it's an interesting situation when you don't have a first team and you have players who need to get minutes, who need to start looking sharp and start seeing what you can get from them. There are also 2 players who could potentially impact the first team, but use the most out of these last couple of weeks that you have with them with game time before the 2023 season is fastly approaching. Anyway, that's the story on the stadium. That's the story on STL City 2. I am Justin Horniker. Thank you for watching. Give me a thumbs up if you like it. Subscribe if you're finding this channel for the first time. And we'll talk soon, my friends.